Thanks, Deirdre. Yeah, so Barry Dixon. I'm from Claremorris, grew up on a farm outside Claremorris a long time ago, and as the youngest of 8, I lived circularity and renewables from a very early age, when it wasn't fashionable at all. I've spent my life in financial markets, analysing financial markets. Initially in commodities, back in the commodity boom in the 1990s, then in the technology sector through the late 90s and into the 2000s, the property market in 2007-8, and so you can see there's a theme emerging here in terms of I really like to pick the sectors. I spent the last number of years as head of equity research in Davy, and most people would know it as Davy Stockbrokers, but it's Davy Group, which is the largest stockbroking company here in Ireland and the largest wealth manager, about to be taken over by Bank of Ireland, as some of you will know. And in the last few years, we have spent a lot of our time trying to figure out how companies can get away with their ESG strategy. So it was very much a tick box exercise for a lot of investors. So this thing of ESG and climate, and how do we cope with that, or how do we address that? Well, it was kind of more or less, okay, so that needs to be done. So we produce our sustainability report, and that will get that monkey away from us. And I suppose the more we've done research into the investment part, if you like, of climate change, it has become so much more important. And that's been driven by consumers. And I was really struck this morning listening to Mohammed and to Theo and the other speakers, because that's who's really driving this. That's who's really driving the consumer. The consumer is saying, actually, do you know what, I no longer want to buy a product which has got a higher carbon footprint. I want to buy products which are kind to the environment and which address the issue of climate change. And that's forcing that discussion and that requirement back up to businesses to produce products and services which address that issue and which can provide consumers with low carbon products and services. And those companies are then having to invest to do that. And that's a real challenge, and we can come on to it, I'm sure, later on, but the challenge for those companies is, can I charge more for these products, or how do I make a return on capital for those goods and services and stay in business? And so our job, I suppose, in terms of Davy and other investment banks like us, is to try and bridge that gap, to provide companies and businesses with funding to develop and fund their carbon transition technologies and solutions which will enable that transition to happen. And I think that, going back to sort of what I was saying a bit earlier about looking at financial markets all my life, of my working career, it became very clear to us over the last few years, and as it has to the rest of the financial community, that this is a massive challenge, it's a massive opportunity. There's a massive amount of capital required to be invested to support and to fund the transition. You can read any of the numbers here. It's going to be 60, 70, 80% of funding required in Ireland alone for us to get to close to our 55% reduction by 2030. That's a massive amount of money. A lot of the money to date has been provided by government, but the government can't and shouldn't really continue to provide that capital. It must come from the private sector, and it must come from private investors, but private investors will need to see that there is a return. And I have to say that, the more work that I've done on this over the past few years, and I have to say I'm a relatively new convert to the sector, I think it's probably the biggest single investment opportunity that I have seen in my career. And I think there's a growing recognition that this is not just a challenge, it's not just a tick box thing anymore, but this is a massive opportunity for businesses to invest in climate change and in the transition. And the returns will be available for that. So we see our job, our job very simply is we know people who have money, we know companies who need money, we take the money from there and we give it to those people who need it. And that's a real part of this value chain of supporting the transition. And I'm delighted to be here to be part of this conversation.
Thanks very much.